One miracle after another. The Pavel Goya story. Chapter 2. I will take care of you. Before the first rays of dawn peeked through his bedroom window, Pavel slipped from beneath the covers to his knees beside the bed. He was determined to keep the promise he had made the night before. Will God be waiting? Will he speak to me again today? He wondered as he bowed his head. Father, it's me, Pavel. I'm here just as I promised. Please help me to be a true friend to you. I'm so thankful that you still want me. Please change my heart. Make me over again the way you have been wanting to. He prayed softly. A feeling of God's presence began to settle in around him just as he had experienced the night before. How grateful he was that God had not abandoned him in his rebellion. With a smile, he reached for his Bible. How he hoped the words would come alive again. And to his amazement, it felt as if each word had been written just for him. As new spiritual insights illuminated his mind, he looked up praying, Father, you are so wonderful. You are beyond comprehension. He never dreamed that the creator of the vast universe would speak so personally to someone as undeserving as he. His heart was overflowing in an atmosphere of grace. The assurance that God would go with him throughout the day came to him just as it had the night before. As his morning appointment with God came to an end, Pavel could feel a broad smile across his face. What a wonderful way to begin the day, he thought, comparing this morning with so many others of the past few years. His new friendship with God had blessed him in ways he could never have imagined. As Pavel reveled in the blessings of his time with God, memories of the chaos that had grown out of his teenage attempts for freedom came back to him. Scene after scene replayed in his mind. Television and movies had occupied most of his spare time, as well as the time he really didn't have to spare. Long into the night, he would watch one movie after another. They had become his routine rather than an occasional entertainment. Exhausted and bleary-eyed, the morning after his movie marathons, he would scramble out of bed at 7:45. With school starting at 8, he faced the ever-present problem that it took 20 minutes to walk to school. A mad frenzy characterized his search for something to put on each morning. It was a race against the clock, and his bedroom was the racetrack. Not every hair was in perfect order as he exited the front door trying to run and tie his shoe at the same time. Nearly the same time each day, Pavel made his grand entrance into the classroom, always 10 to 15 minutes into the period, with the teacher having already begun the instruction. One morning, he had come up with an ingenious, foolproof excuse for his tardiness that he was sure even the brightest professors would be unable to see through. Rushing into the classroom with the lecture already in progress, he began his speech. Early this morning, I started out for school in order to be one of the first to arrive. With the extra time I allowed for busy traffic, I was sure I would be early. Everything was fine until I came to Central Boulevard. I had no way of knowing that a funeral procession would be passing at the very instant I needed to cross the street. The procession must have been for a government dignitary of some kind, because the line of cars stretched as far as I could see. I waited and waited for them to pass. The procession was barely creeping. It moved only half as fast as most funerals. It seemed as if it would never end. I realized after 15 or 20 minutes that I would probably be a little late, as only half the cars had passed. I would have made a mad dash through the procession, but out of respect, I decided to wait patiently. Just as soon as the last car passed by, I hurried here as fast as I could. Concluding his dramatic presentation, he walked back to take his seat. He was sure he had been convincing enough that even the most intuitive had been swept away by his eloquence. The next morning, he reasoned that since everything had gone so smoothly, why not use the same foolproof alibi again? A new funeral procession arrived at Central Boulevard each day at precisely the moment he was about to cross. After numerous dramatic oratories, the teacher came up with a time-saving alternative to his presentation. As Pavel came through the door, he would simply ask without looking up, "Goya, another funeral?" Pavel needed only to nod in agreement and to walk to his seat. His plan turned out to be even more ingenious than he had first imagined. Now, a simple yes or a nod was all that it took to fool his entire classroom completely. Pavel may not have, however, considered one factor. He had been responsible for burying more dignitaries than existed in the entire country. From where were all these important people coming? And how unfortunate that so many should die in succession. As his recent past replayed in his mind, a new sense of gratitude emerged. His past had been nothing short of chaotic. The biggest shock of all came the first day he really did arrive at school early. The entire class stared in disbelief. How thankful the undertaker must have been for a little reprieve. With each passing day, Pavel's love affair with God deepened. The Bible promises he had learned as a child came flooding back through his mind. Now they weren't just beautiful words. He could claim them as his own promises. Opening his heart to God in prayer had become like talking to his best friend. Each morning, he opened his eyes with a sense of expectation and an eagerness for what the day would bring. He could hardly wait to discover the new blessing that awaited him. The Bible became a book alive with power. Over and over, he experienced the morning's scripture supply him with just the strength he needed for the day. Encountering the words of Jeremiah in Lamentations 3:22 and 23, he could only look heavenward and say, "Lord, your word is true. This is what you do for me each day." The Lord's loving kindness indeed never cease, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Often, as God spoke personally to him, tears would well up in his eyes. "Lord, how could I have missed all this before?" he whispered. It was one thing to read the words of Isaiah 50. It was altogether another to experience them. He awakens me morning by morning. He awakens my ear to listen as a disciple. Thank you, Lord, that I didn't need my alarm clock to wake me up this morning. You are faithful, just as your word says. The first thoughts to greet me each morning are your words. It's thrilling to hear you call my name and whisper, "I've been waiting for you." Your loving kindness is truly beyond comprehension. Pavel prayed as he reflected on the excitement he was experiencing in his newfound friendship with God. He knew that without God's help, his desire to be cool would regain control in his life. Seeking his friend's acceptance had taken him far from God once, and he determined by his grace not ever to let pride rule his life again. Openly in prayer, he confessed his weakness before leaving his house each day. He prayed that God would help him care more about what God thought, than what others thought. A remarkable transformation began to take place. Thinking about and talking to God each morning began to make him more like his new friend. Things he had been struggling with began to lose their appeal. The desire was just gone. God was changing him, just as he had promised. Growing up with the image of his father kneeling in prayer had continually perplexed him until a few days ago. Why anyone would spend so much time talking to a God he couldn't see or hear had been a total mystery. But now he understood perfectly. The example of Jesus in the Gospel of Mark became his pattern for each new day. Rising up a great while before day, he went out and departed into a solitary place and there prayed. Mark 1:35. He resolved to make the secret place of prayer that empowered Jesus' life his own. What an experience! Life had taken on a whole new meaning. With the psalmist, he could say, "All my springs of joy are in you." Psalms 87 and verse 7. A test of loyalty came a few weeks after promising God that he would never leave home without knowing he was with him. After inviting God to awaken him for their time together, he had awakened between 4 and 5 a.m., but for some reason had fallen back asleep. When his eyes focused on the alarm clock, he groaned. It was 7:30. How could this have happened, Pavel wondered. Now, what should he do? He had to decide whether to stay for his appointment with God or make a mad dash for the classroom. A real struggle began. His class schedule had changed. In place of the teacher familiar with funerals, he had the most hard-nosed communist teacher in the school. Everyone feared him. He made sure that everyone understood that it wouldn't be wise to cross him. Even worse, he openly mocked the idea of God. To be late to one of his classes wouldn't soon be forgotten. Pictures of facing his displeasure began to taunt him. A voice began urging him to forget his promise just this once. After all, God certainly wanted him to be a good student. What should he do? Another voice began to speak quietly to him. Are you going to trust me and spend the time it takes to know I am with you? I have gone ahead of you, solving problems and working out difficulties. Will you trust me with this one too? Pavel knew there was really only one choice he could make, and be true to his agreement. Quietly, he began his time with God. From time to time, pictures of a furious professor flashed before him, and each time he surrendered them to God. It was almost 2 hours before he felt the peace and assurance that he needed. Pavel prayed each step of the longest walk he had ever taken to school. What would happen? Would he be expelled from his first class period? He knew it was a required class to graduate. With each thought challenging his peace, he simply said, God and giving it to you. It was almost 10 a.m. when he came walking into class. He had completely missed his first class, and second period was in session. Taking his seat, he looked over at a friend in the next row. His glance was returned with a look of astonishment. Leaning over a bit, his friend whispered, "How did you know the professor in the first period would be sick today? Your timing is amazing." And that's not all. The teacher somehow forgot to take attendance. Can you believe it? That's never happened before. Goya, you've got to be the luckiest guy on earth. Pavel sighed with relief as he realized that God had blessed him for remaining faithful to him. Over and over, he watched little details work out in ways he could never have solved on his own. God's blessings followed him, not only in the classroom, but also in his work. Since he had given his life to God, he had a growing desire to excel as a craftsman. His father's excellent reputation as a contractor had people willing to wait for his skill and expertise for their projects. In his after-school hours, the family business provided Pavel the opportunity to learn various aspects of building as well as to earn some spending money. Of all the skills he learned, cutting glass was one of his favorites. God soon blessed him with proficiency and accuracy that few craftsmen ever acquire. Several commercial projects required fire-rated wire glass to be used in specified locations. Even fewer tradesmen had experience cutting this special glass. With his father as his tutor, he learned the trade secrets of this special skill. Shortly after Pavel turned 16, the opportunity came to prove that he was indeed a competent craftsman, not just a punk teenager in the workplace. The county building commissioner had come to rely on Pavel's father to help him out when he was falling behind on completion deadlines. Often, unforeseen problems would arise, causing costly delays. Many times, it appeared that the project could never be finished on time. Frantically, the commissioner would contact Mr. Goya to help him meet a deadline. Over and over, God had blessed, enabling him to accomplish far more than anyone thought possible. It was always a sore spot, however, when the weekend came and Mr. Goya announced that he would not be coming to work the next day, as it was his day of worship. Repeatedly, the plea would come for him to work, but he always remained faithful to his convictions. Once again, the county building commissioner was in a jam. One of the country's largest auto repair centers was under construction. It would be a state-of-the-art building with multi-level parking alongside. The project was scheduled to be completed by the end of October, and it had fallen significantly behind. To make matters worse, the president of the country was scheduled to visit the city at the end of October. Seeing this architectural masterpiece was on his agenda. One of the areas that had fallen critically behind was the cutting of wire glass. Several areas required this special glass to meet code. He had searched everywhere, but few people had the knowledge and skill to cut this kind of glass. Mr. Goya just happened to be one of those few who could help him out. Desperately, he pleaded for another rescue from Mr. Goya. "I'm so sorry I can't help you. I'm scheduled solid until January with deadlines of my own," replied Mr. Goya apologetically. but I know someone who could do it for you. My son has become very skilled at cutting wire glass. He can cut it as well as I can. I'm sure he would be glad to help you out." The commissioner was not excited about hiring a 16-year-old for such a difficult assignment. But with 2 months of work needing to be finished in less than a month, what choice did he have? Pavel was excited to be able to prove himself as a craftsman. How thankful he was for the confidence his new life had given him. As soon as school was out, he went directly to the construction site. Finding the chief engineer, he introduced himself as the glass cutter who had been hired by the building commissioner. The haughty chief engineer was not pleased, and an angry scowl instantly darkened his face. He grumbled that he had been sent a kid rather than a man. He needed a specialist, not some teenager still wet behind the ears. He had enough problems without having to babysit. In spite of his new cursing supervisor, Pavel cheerfully went to work. Each time he used his diamond scoring tool, a perfect cut followed. The installation went just as smoothly. He could never remember a time his work had been performed with such proficiency. With his putty knife in one hand and a bead of glazing in the other, he formed a perfectly symmetrical glazing around the edge of the glass. He was amazed as each opening was perfectly completed and in record time. Late each night, he worked, attempting to meet the deadline. When the first weekend came, Pavel announced that he would not be at work the next day, as he was a Christian, and it was his day of worship. A fit of cursing, such as he had never heard, began to spew out of the engineer's mouth. The outraged supervisor made it quite clear he despised having him on the project. He had been sure Pavel couldn't do the work, and when Pavel had proved he could do it perfectly and in record time, the supervisor hated him all the more. There was no way to please the man. In spite of all the threats and insults, Pavel was in church the following day. When Pavel returned to the job site, he was insulted in every way possible. It was clear that his supervisor was determined to make his life as miserable as he could. He didn't want a kid on his job, and the fact that Pavel was a Christian made it all the worse. Pavel couldn't even walk from one place to the other on the job site without enduring profane cursing and gesturing. Patiently he did his job, enduring the daily abusive onslaught. At last, the project was finished. He was exhausted, but he was proud of both the quality and the record speed in which his work had been accomplished. Each classification of work had a posted pay schedule. Some work was scheduled for hourly compensation. Other workers were paid a set amount for each item completed. The glass work had a pay schedule for each square meter of installed glass. As he completed each opening, Pavel kept a running tally of his square meters. He was making far more than the men around him. The tradesmen earned 1,600 to 1,800 lei per month working at an hourly rate. The project supervisor, who despised him, was earning 2,400 lei per month. In the 3 weeks he had worked with the wire glass by the square meter, he had earned 5,500 lei. 2 months and 2 men had been allotted for his part of the project. With God working as his partner, he completed it in just 3 weeks. There was a song in his heart as he left the job site. But the song quickly faded as he went to collect his pay. The supervisor's face twisted in a fit of rage, with more cursing as he screamed, "I don't even make that much money and I'm the chief engineer. I'm not about to pay some punk kid twice as much as I make. I'm going to pay you 1,200 lei and not any more." Pavel protested, referring to the posted pay schedule, but to no avail. Sadly, he made his way home. Was this the way he was to be repaid for all the long hours he had worked? It wasn't fair, and he wasn't going to settle for it without a protest. The county building commissioner was the one to hire him, and to the county building commissioner he would appeal. Walking into the city-county building felt somewhat intimidating. Who would listen to a young boy's protest against a project engineer? The secretary for the county building engineers department listened to his plea for justice. "You come back in the morning at 8 a.m. sharp, and I'll give you the first 5 minutes on his schedule," she promised. With a smile, Pavel thanked her, realizing that his invisible partner was still working for him. With a start, he sat up in bed. It was 7:45 a.m. "Oh no, I've overslept again," he moaned. He was supposed to be at the city-county building in just 15 minutes. Grabbing his clothes, he started for the door. With his hand on the doorknob, he heard a voice say, "Pavel, did you pray? Are you going to leave home without me today?" "But I have an appointment with the commissioner. What will he think of me if I don't even show up?" Pavel reasoned. "Are you going to trust me this time? Or are you going out on your own today?" replied the still small voice. Choosing to trust God, come what may, he decided not to leave until he knew God was with him. It was 10 a.m. when that familiar peace returned to his heart. Looking at the clock, he thought about just canceling his trip to town. What do I have to lose? I might as well go and see what happens. The same polite smile greeted him as he approached the secretary's desk to apologize for his tardiness. She assured him that he shouldn't worry, as the Prime Minister had come and had been in meetings all morning with each of the department heads. "You come back tomorrow, and I'll see what I can do," she said. Relieved, Pavel turned to leave. Just as he reached the door, she called to him, "Wait!" At that very moment, the building commissioner opened the door of the conference room and started across the hall for the restroom. He came over to her desk to see what all the excitement was about. After listening for a moment, he told the secretary to validate Pavel's story from the job site and prepare a full report for him to review. The next day, Pavel received a phone call from the secretary. "You can come and pick up your check." With a 3-month paycheck in his pocket, Pavel walked home with a spring in his step. The end of chapter 2. One miracle after another. The Pavel Goya story. I will take care of you.